was called into this case when a woman was killed in West Palm Beach, Florida, and her body was dumped in a construction site. This is not something that anyone would expect in a beautiful, peaceful, quiet neighborhood.
All the signs point to a serial killer on the loose.
The individual who committed this crime was very angry and out of control, and he could do this again.
At the break of dawn on a Saturday morning in West Palm Beach, Florida, construction workers report to work for the weekend shift. When one of them conducts a routine check of the barricades around the site, he makes a shocking discovery: the body of a young woman lying in a ditch. She has been stabbed multiple times. Detective Mike Waits from the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office is one of the first officers to arrive at the scene. Today, the area is a well-developed residential neighborhood.
This would have been roughly the area where her body was located. There was a ditch, had 3 posts around it used for triangulation, for surveying. As you walked up to the body, the only thing that was visible would have been her head above the ground surface. We see her shoes are still on her feet. Other than that, there's no other clothing on her body.
It appears that the killer has posed the woman's body in the ditch. About 30 feet away, investigators discover the victim's clothes and an empty knife sheath. They also find something else.
There are tire tracks that we associated that lead back to the main road. These tire tracks both came into the crime scene and back out to the road. And from there, we have no idea where the offender would have gone.
Only one set of tire tracks. That suggests that the victim and her killer arrived in the same car. But there's nothing at the scene to help investigators identify the woman. They take the body to the medical examiner's office for further investigation. The autopsy report concludes that the cause of death was multiple stab wounds inflicted by a short knife, one that would have fit into the empty sheath found at the crime scene. There has been no sexual assault, but Detective Waits still has no idea who the victim is.
The biggest obstacle we had to overcome initially was we had to identify our victim so we could identify where she had been, her last activities, who she last would have been with, what her scheduled activities would have been.
The investigators need help from the public in order to find out who the victim is. A forensic artist draws a composite sketch of the woman, which is published in the local newspaper the next day. Investigators hope that somebody will recognize the face of the victim, and someone does.
The sheriff's office received a phone call from a female who said that she thought the sketch was that of her roommate. They had that female come to the medical examiner's office where she made a positive identification.
Finally, Detective Waits can place a name on the dead woman. The victim is 27-year-old Sonia Doss Porter. She worked the evening shift at a local tanning salon, struggling to support herself and her 5-year-old child. Newly divorced, she had recently started seeing other people. On the day she disappeared, Sonia had called the tanning salon to tell them her car had a flat tire and that she wouldn't be able to make it to work that day.
We still don't know what's happened to her vehicle. We don't know where she went after she was last seen alive.
Detective Waits calls criminal profiler Dale Hinman, hoping that she might be able to establish a psychological sketch of the killer. When Hinman takes a first look at the evidence, something immediately catches her attention.
The brutal way the victim was murdered and the fact that her clothing was cut off and her body was posed in a little hole led us to believe that the individual who committed this crime was very angry and out of control, and he could do this again.
In West Palm Beach, Florida, a worker finds a young woman murdered on a construction site. Criminal profiler Dale Hinman thinks the perpetrator may kill again.
We really felt that this offender was really out of control, the way this crime occurred, and the fact that the victim was posed in the ditch at the construction site. We all felt like he was going to do this again.
To back up her theory, Agent Hinman and Detective Waits revisit the crime scene. They hope to find more signs of the killer's mental state at the time of the murder.
This was the area that we found Sonia's body. It was a construction site back then. None of the houses were here. It was open, it was vacant.
It's interesting that he would choose this spot for this attack, that if he had continued driving out west, her body would never have been found. So this either means that he wanted her found or he's relatively inexperienced.
The evidence at the crime scene tells Agent Hinman something else about the perpetrator and what happened that night.
Oh, and you have footprints at the scene as well.
Right. You've got footprints, you have tire tracks, you've got articles of clothing that belong to her that are laid out, going from where we think a vehicle would have been parked.
How far are these garments of clothing from where the body was discovered?
Probably 30 feet.
The footprints found at the scene indicate to Hinman that at some point the victim was trying to get away from her attacker.
Looks like he might have lost control of her if the attacks began to occur and he's cutting clothing off of her, and you can tell that there's some type of struggle, but it appears that he's lost control of her at some point.
The fact that the victim briefly escaped from her attacker gives Hinman another clue as to what type of killer they are dealing with.
I think he's really inexperienced as a murderer at this point, but he probably learned a lot from the commission of this crime. I'd be looking for him to do this again.
Investigators now need to find out what happened to the victim after she was stranded with a flat tire. Who picked her up? And why did she get into the car? Could it be someone she knew? Detective Waits begins to trace Sonia Doss Porter's last steps. He looks into her lifestyle and the men she associated with. And he needs to find out exactly what she was doing during the last hours of her life.
We went to bars located in and around the crime scene. And then once we learned where her place of employment was, we visited the bars in that area to see if anyone had had contact with her, or if she'd been seen there on that night.
And Detective Waits gets another piece of the puzzle.
This is one of the bars that we went to. We came in with Sonia's picture that we had. We showed it to the bartender, and the bartender remembered Sonia being inside the bar on Friday evening prior to the discovery of her body.
Sonia had a soda at the bar the night she was murdered. She left alone and was never seen again. Detective Waits also talks to Sonia's boss at Fantastic Tan. He is able to provide another critical piece of information.
We went to Sonia's last known place of employment, and we spoke to her boss, who told us that Sonia had been seen a gentleman he identified as John, that she had a difficult relationship with him, but he could provide no further information as far as who John was, a last name, or how we could contact him.
A common first name isn't much of a clue, and Detective Waits has no other leads. Then, something happens that will change the course of the investigation. The Sheriff's Department receives a call. Another woman has been found dead. All units are dispatched to a wooded area, close to another construction site. The sheriff's helicopter scans the crime scene from above.
Eagle 2 Palm Beach, we're 1097 in the area of the crime scene now.
Coming up next on Body of Evidence. Has the same killer struck again? A young woman has been murdered on a construction site in West Palm Beach, Florida. A few weeks later, a second young female is found murdered in a scene eerily similar to the first. Just like Sonia Doss Porter, this victim's nude body was found near a construction site. The second victim also has multiple stab wounds, and once again, there is no sign of sexual assault.
As soon as I heard that there was another murder in this same area, I wanted to find out if the two cases might be related.
Investigators identify the victim as Paula Bailey, the mother of a 4-year-old child. When she didn't come home one night, her family suspected that something terrible must have happened. Detective Waits takes Special Agent Dale Hinman to the second crime scene to see if Paula's death is related to the first homicide.
You get the similarities of this area to Sonia's. Construction, it's off a major highway, but yet it's not something that's readily accessible at time of night.
Even though these two areas are not very close together geographically, the crime scenes are very similar. That in each of these cases, the perpetrator left the victim in plain view in an area that was well traveled. Also, the cause of death is very similar. The clothing was cut off the victims, and both of the victims were stabbed multiple times. These cases very well may be related.
And another piece of evidence seems to support the theory that one killer committed both murders. Once again, there are tire tracks.
Again, another similarity that we have is it's areas that are traveled, but there's only one set of tire tracks that we associate with this crime scene as the same as in the first crime scene that we were at.
One set of tire tracks means that the victim and the killer came together in the same car, just like the first homicide.
There's no indication that the victims are bound or they're knocked unconscious or they're intoxicated, so there's something about this individual that he doesn't appear threatening, that these victims will drive for, in both cases, quite a long distance with the person apparently lacking any fear. They don't try to jump from the car or call for help, or apparently he does have enough charisma that they're going willingly with him to these locations and not afraid.
Another element is added to the killer's profile. He evidently has good social skills, and Hinman spots something else in his behavior.
I think it's really significant that both of these crimes have occurred after dark, so he's available at night to go out and commit these crimes, and it could be that they're related to the construction that's in the area, or these could be an area that are familiar to him.
Hinman remains convinced that they are dealing with the same man, possibly a budding serial killer. But before they can investigate the matter, there is an unexpected break in the murder of Sonia Doss Porter, the first victim. Officers respond to a 911 call from a local Winn-Dixie grocery store.
A call had come into the sheriff's office about an individual walking into a Winn-Dixie store. This individual had come in and he had made statements to the effect that he had killed his girlfriend, or his girlfriend had been killed and dumped in a ditch. And then the white male left the store.
Officers immediately put out an all-points bulletin. The manhunt is on. A sheriff's helicopter provides support from above.
Eagle 2, signal 14, the backside of the store there. He's probably in the wooded area just to the south and to the west of that location.
But after hours of searching, all units come up empty. With the suspect gone, Detective Waits asks the clerk from the store to help with a composite sketch of the man. But when they get back to the sheriff's department, they are in for a surprise. The man they've been looking for is already there.
As they're doing the sketch, she walks out of a room and actually sees the individual here and says, "That's the gentleman that came into the Winn-Dixie. That's who I'm talking about."
The man's name is John Kent.
John Kent was the man the police had been searching for. He was identified as the individual that Sonia was dating at the time she was murdered.
At first, Kent tells investigators that he came to the station because he heard they were looking for him. When informed of the clerk's statement, Kent denies having said that he killed Sonia Doss Porter. But in the eyes of investigators, he's still a suspect.
Based on the interview, we asked him for hair samples. We asked him if we could search his vehicle to see if there's anything that would associate him with our crime scene or our victim with any of his belongings, to which he complied.
But when the forensic results come back from the crime lab, there is no evidence at all linking John Kent to Sonia's death.
From what I could determine in the interview with him, it was probably misunderstood by the clerk, the way or what he was saying.
Evidently, John only told the grocery clerk that his girlfriend had been found murdered, and somehow she misunderstood him. Without another suspect or any new evidence, the investigation into the murders of Sonia and Paula goes cold. 8 years go by before something happens to heat things up again. The 911 center of the West Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. Dispatcher Ann Cogburn has just started the afternoon shift.
Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, 911.
I'm calling in regards of a murder case.
Okay, you have information about it?
Okay, it happened at a housing development that was under construction.
Okay, did you commit this crime?
Huh?
Did you commit this crime?
Yes, I did.
When body of evidence returns, who is the caller, and is he telling the truth? Sonia Doss Porter and Paula Bailey have been killed in West Palm Beach, Florida. Investigators believe that the same man is responsible for both murders. Now, after 8 years, there is a break in the investigation. A man calls from a payphone and claims he has information about the murder of one of the victims, Sonia Doss Porter.
Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, 911.
I'm calling in regards of a murder case.
Okay, did you commit this crime?
Yes, I did, and as soon as I hang up with y'all, I'm going to go to the police department and turn myself in.
What is your name?
But dispatcher Ann Cogburn does not want to let the caller off the phone until she finds out where he is.
I don't believe at that time while I was on the phone with him that he would actually turn himself in. I believe that he was actually purging himself of what he did, and that would be the end of it.
Ann Cogburn talks to the man for over an hour, using all of her skills and experience to make him trust her.
I was able to gain his confidence, where he finally confessed to me where his location was, and then that's when I got law enforcement officers on scene to apprehend him.
Investigators discover the caller is Terry John Van Zyl, a 33-year-old farmer with no criminal record. Detective Wayne Robinson of the Palm Beach County Cold Case Unit has taken over both murder cases. He knows every detail about the homicides and decides to interview Terry Van Zyl in person. Detectives don't know much about the man and don't know what to expect during the interview. But almost immediately, Van Zyl drops a self-incriminating bombshell.
And when I asked him about if he had left anything at the scene, and he indicated he had dropped his sheath to his folding knife, I knew then that this is the guy that committed the crime.
As Robinson continues the interview, the story of the murder of Sonia Doss Porter begins to unfold.
It was during the time that State Road 80 was under construction. And I picked her up on State Road 80 here. Her car was broke down.
The killer tells Detective Robinson that Sonia accepted his offer of a lift after she was stranded with a flat tire. He then drove her to the construction site in a company pickup truck. When he tried to sexually assault her, she began to scream and fight back. That's when he says he panicked and killed her.
Everyone involved in this investigation felt so fortunate when Terry Van Zyl called the sheriff's office and talked about how he felt remorse for committing a murder in that area and that he was afraid he was going to kill again.
Van Zyl is charged with the murder of Sonia Doss Porter. He is sentenced to life in prison. But is this man also responsible for the murder of Paula Bailey? Investigators have always believed that both women were killed by the same man. But Van Zyl steadfastly denies any involvement in Paula Bailey's death. The case remains open, but a killer is off the streets.
We all felt that Sonia and Paula were killed by the same individual because there were so many similarities between the two crimes. We all hope that he will someday confess to the murder of Paula Bailey because this can help to bring some closure to her family. But even if he doesn't, he's still in prison for life and he won't be able to harm other women.